Many Old West lawmen performed commendable duties, with some even achieving fame. However, a few operated on both sides of the law. The Western frontier saw thousands of men serve as constables, sheriffs, policemen, marshals, and detectives. Their daily tasks were often routine, such as collecting taxes, ensuring licenses were current, arresting domestic abusers, regulating illegal alcohol sales, checking store doors at night, and maintaining order in saloons, gambling establishments, and other entertainment venues. Contrary to the dramatic portrayals in Western films and TV shows, gunfights, hangings, and pursuits of stagecoach and train robbers were not as common. Most lawmen upheld the law with integrity. Figures like Virgil Earp, Bill Tillman, and Charlie Siringo faced exceptional circumstances in their careers, excelling in law enforcement roles across various Western states and territories. However, some lawmen were less reliable outside their official duties. Wyatt Earp, Virgil's brother, had a checkered past, including an arrest for horse theft, involvement in prostitution in Peoria, Illinois, in 1872, and running an illegal faro game in Los Angeles in 1911. In Cochise County, Arizona Territory, Bert Alvord served effectively as a constable and deputy sheriff, but later turned to train robbery. Some lawmen were simply untrustworthy. Henry Plummer, elected Marshal of Nevada City, California, in 1856, revealed his true nature the following year. After arresting a man for domestic violence, he began consoling the man's wife, often visiting her at night, and ultimately caused the husband's death. Though sentenced to a long term in San Quentin, Plummer was released in 1859 for health reasons and eventually ended up in what would soon become Montana Territory. In 1863, he persuaded locals to elect him Sheriff of Bannock, a new gold rush region. Within weeks, the Plummer Gang, as they were known, committed numerous robberies and other crimes, the exact number of which remains debated, especially in recent years. The residents of Bannock, Virginia City, and other boom towns eventually grew tired of the rampant lawlessness. In January 1864, they took action, resulting in the most significant episode of vigilante justice in U.S. history. By late January, citizen groups had executed 20 men, and by October 1867, the total had reached 50. The most notable was Sheriff Plummer himself, who was executed on January 10, 1864, alongside deputies Ned Ray and Buck Stinson. This trio undoubtedly understood the close relationship between crime and punishment. Thomas Kelly, a longtime clerk in the San Francisco City Police Department, was another such lawman. Often hired as a special officer, he was also a pickpocket and carried unauthorized weapons. His extensive record included several arrests while he was still employed as an officer. In 1899, he was featured in Police Chief Isaiah Lees's Rogues Gallery. Rumor had it that Kelly was protected due to his Irish heritage, a significant factor in the law enforcement community of that era. Kelly proved to be nearly as duplicitous, if not as infamous, as Plummer. Some lawmen who veered off course had troubled pasts or faced difficult circumstances. Billy Blankenship started as a constable and climbed the ranks to become deputy sheriff of Maricopa County, Arizona Territory, and then city marshal of Phoenix in the 1880s. However, the death of his daughter reportedly led him to alcoholism. Consequently, he mismanaged his accounts, collected illegal taxes, and accepted bribes from prostitutes. To his credit, he eventually made a full public confession, apologized, and resigned, with the city council and fellow citizens choosing not to prosecute. Blankenship moved to the copper town of Jerome, Arizona Territory, where he worked as a mine watchman. Recognizing his talents, the local sheriff hired him as a deputy, and within a few years, Blankenship redeemed himself and became city marshal of Jerome. Around the turn of the 20th century, U.S. Marshal Ben Daniels was a prominent lawman in Arizona Territory. Daniels had a colorful background as a Kansas buffalo hunter, assistant marshal in Dodge City, deputy sheriff in Bent County, Colorado, city marshal in Cripple Creek, Colorado, and later in Guthrie, Oklahoma Territory. He was also a respected member of Theodore Roosevelt's Rough Riders, participating in the charge up Cuba's San Juan Heights during the Spanish-American War. President Roosevelt appointed him U.S. Marshal of Arizona Territory in 1902. However, shortly after his appointment, details of his past emerged. In his 20s, Daniels had been arrested for stealing Army mules and spent 3 years in a Wyoming penitentiary. When Roosevelt learned of Daniels' criminal record, he requested his resignation. Nevertheless, Roosevelt and others believed Daniels' long, distinguished law enforcement career outweighed his youthful mistakes. On Roosevelt's recommendation, the incoming governor appointed Daniels superintendent of the territorial prison at Yuma, and in 1905, the president reappointed him U.S. Marshal of Arizona Territory, marking one of the most unusual turns in Western law enforcement history. In his later years, Daniels served as sheriff of Pima County. Many lawmen who crossed the line were motivated by self-interest. Patrolman Wiley Lewis of Pasadena, California, recommended to the post by the chief of police, became well acquainted with the homes and stores along his beat in 1919. With a large family to support and a salary that wasn't enough, he began using his routes to his advantage, borrowing cars from friends and committing numerous thefts over several months. He took items like hams, barrels of sugar, and a ton of canned goods to provide for his family. He also stole bicycles, car tires, a brass bed, paintings, and clothes. When police searched his home, they found the stolen goods, along with a mask and cap commonly used by thieves. After serving time in San Quentin, Lewis spent the rest of his days working at a Nevada silver mill. Frank Dyer, a sometime miner, was appointed U.S. Marshal of Utah in 1886 and served for 3 years. He effectively managed legal issues concerning the Mormon population, particularly in cohabitation cases. Dyer was also very shrewd with his finances. For instance, he charged the government for seed potatoes, had prisoners plant and tend to them, and then sold the harvested potatoes back to the government for prison rations. He employed a similar tactic with dairy cows, charging the government for feed, having prisoners care for the cows, and then selling the milk to the federal prison. A Justice Department report on Dyer's questionable practices suggested he change his ways. One of the most fascinating Western lawmen was Johnny Behan, whose career spanned 3 decades. He held numerous positions, including serving as a member of the Arizona Territorial Legislature, sheriff of 2 counties, superintendent at the Yuma Territorial Prison, school inspector, tax collector, and federal border inspector. Behan is best known for his role as the Cochise County Sheriff, who sided with the extra-legal cowboys, some of whom were alleged rustlers, in their conflict with the Earp faction in Tombstone, Arizona Territory. Behan was unable to prevent the October 1881 gunfight near the OK Corral, and later testified extensively against fellow lawmen Virgil and Wyatt Earp. Although he was certainly no hero, neither was he inherently malicious. Nevertheless, controversy seemed to follow Behan wherever he went. He was frequently involved in court cases, either suing or being sued. During his tenure as sheriff of Cochise County, Behan appeared in court 5 times to answer felony charges, all of which were eventually dismissed, but they indicated a recurring pattern. Dr. George Emery Goodfellow twice sued Behan when he tried to collect rent on property he no longer owned. After Behan was discharged as warden of the territorial prison, newspapers and courts exposed him as a poor administrator. No matter where he settled, Behan had a knack for winning people over and securing prominent positions, either by election or appointment. However, his terms of office were often followed by investigations, charges, and likely court action. Though Billy Stiles served multiple times as a peace officer in Arizona Territory, including as a deputy for the renowned Cochise County Sheriff John Horton Slaughter, his inclusion in Western law enforcement history is somewhat ironic. Stiles was initially a prospector and a mediocre rancher before teaming up with Bert Alvord as a constable in Pierce, and later in Wilcox, a bustling cattle shipping town. Alvord occasionally deputized Stiles, primarily for saloon duties, before they embarked on their criminal endeavors. The pair robbed 2 trains, were captured and jailed, escaped, and were caught again. Upon release, the Stiles visited Alvord in jail, and they escaped once more. After being recaptured, Stiles was recruited by the Arizona Rangers as a special agent to help apprehend Alvord, but instead, both fled once again. Stiles eventually settled in Nevada under the alias William Larkin and became a deputy sheriff in Humboldt County. His performance was mediocre, and he soon angered certain individuals by turning in one of their associates. On December 5, 1908, those individuals ended Deputy Larkin's undistinguished law enforcement career. Meanwhile, outlaw lawman Alvord disappeared into Central America, vanishing from historical records in 1910. Tom Horn's name carries a certain poetic resonance, and he was a notable frontier figure in his time. In the 1870s and 1880s, he served the Army as an exceptional tracker during various campaigns against the Apaches in Arizona Territory. Later, he ranched for a period, served as a deputy sheriff during the territory's violent Pleasant Valley War, and eventually hired out as a gun hand or paid enforcer for livestock interests on the northern plains. Like Bean, controversy trailed Tom Horn wherever he went. He had a knack for making both friends and enemies. For a time, he worked as a Pinkerton detective based out of the agency's Denver office, though with limited success. In April 1891, after a faro game was robbed in Reno, local authorities apprehended Horn on an outbound train. A search revealed he was carrying a mask, pistol, and money. Despite the incriminating evidence, Horn was released after legal proceedings. Fellow Pinkerton agent Charlie Siringo claimed the agency believed Horn was guilty, but could not risk damaging its reputation with a conviction. In later years, Horn worked as a deputy sheriff and as a hired gun for Wyoming cattle barons. During a controversial, drunken confession, he reportedly admitted to killing a local rancher's boy, calling it the best shot I ever made and the dirtiest trick I ever done. Whether guilty or not, the people of Wyoming had reached their limit. Horn was tried, convicted, and hanged in Cheyenne on November 20th, 1903. Ben Thompson was another lawman who drew on lessons from a checkered past. Texans who hired him likely believed that a gunfighter with rough frontier experience was well suited for a peace officer role. British-born Thompson arrived in Texas as a boy and grew up as a wanderer and occasional gambler. He had killed several men in Mexico, frequented the saloons of Kansas, Texas, and other places, and had numerous confrontations in Abilene, Ellsworth, and other Kansas cattle towns. Well acquainted with the frontier, he decided to switch sides and ran for city marshal of Austin in 1879 but lost. A shift in local politics favored him in 1880, and he was elected marshal. Despite one historian's claim that Thompson rarely spent a sober day on the job, Austinites were seemingly satisfied and re-elected him the following year. In July 1882, during a family vacation in San Antonio, Marshal Ben Thompson encountered his longtime nemesis, Jack Harris, at the latter's vaudeville theater and saloon. The two exchanged hostile glances, and Thompson believed Harris was reaching for his gun. Thompson later justified his actions, saying, "I drew and fired. I was an officer and belonged to a detective agency." Despite this, the marshal spent months in jail before being acquitted. He chose not to continue as Austin City Marshal. 2 years later, Thompson and his friend King Fisher, a former deputy sheriff of Uvalde County, visited San Antonio and, perhaps unwisely, stopped by the vaudeville for a drink. The theater's new managers still harbored resentment over Harris's death. In a confrontation, they shot Thompson and Fisher, an act a court later ruled justifiable. Thus ended the career of a man effective at enforcing the law because he understood those on the other side. Sheriff Charles Royer of Grand County, Colorado, had ambitions for a larger role in local politics. After arriving in Colorado in 1878, he prospected, raised cattle, and secured a mail delivery contract. Well-liked and seen as sober and diligent, he was elected sheriff in 1879 and re-elected 2 years later. However, Royer became entangled in the heated county seat dispute between Hot Sulphur Springs and Grand Lake. On the morning of July 4, 1883, as two commissioners and the county clerk headed to a meeting at the Grand Lake courthouse, 4 masked men attacked them. One commissioner returned fire, resulting in 3 fatalities, including one of the attackers, who turned out to be a county commissioner. The other 3 assailants fled, among them Royer and his undersheriff. After a brief investigation, the sheriff vanished. 12 days later, local newspapers reported shocking news with the headline, "More Blood, Charlie Royer blows his brains out in Georgetown." Having bent the law to his purposes with tragic consequences, the sheriff seemingly couldn't live with the outcome. In 1910, a conspiracy involving a dubious Nevada lawman centered on high grading, the illegal removal of gold or silver from a processing plant. While workers usually smuggled out such valuables in lunch buckets or their pockets, the Goldfield Consolidated Mill Assayer devised a more secretive plan. Collaborating with a mill worker, a prominent local businessman, and Bart Knight, a former undersheriff of Esmeralda County Turntown Constable, the assayer persuaded the consolidated employee to enter the mill at night, scrape gold amalgam off the plates, and smuggle it out. The plot unraveled when a night watchman, bribed to look the other way, informed the company detective. The detective then hired a stenographer to take notes during a covert meeting attended by Knight, during which money changed hands. The mill worker was subsequently caught in the act. In a case that reached the Nevada Supreme Court, Knight and his co-conspirators faced grand larceny charges. The mill worker testified in exchange for immunity, and the assayer was convicted. However, the constable and the businessman avoided prison due to a lack of corroborative testimony, leading to the dismissal of their cases. Nevertheless, Knight's career as a lawman was finished. Once a leading candidate for county sheriff, he was listed as an unemployed resident of Goldfield when he registered for the draft in World War I. Henry Newton Brown, originally from Missouri, ventured westward and navigated a dual role in law enforcement amidst dramatic frontier events. After his days as a buffalo hunter, he joined Billy the Kid's regulators during the Lincoln County War in New Mexico Territory and participated in the ambush killing of Sheriff William Brady. Subsequently indicted for murder, he fled to Texas, where he became a deputy sheriff in Oldham County. Later relocating to Caldwell, Kansas, Brown served as an assistant city marshal and eventually a city marshal. His popularity among citizens led to multiple re-elections and the presentation of an intricately engraved Winchester rifle. Perhaps emboldened by his esteem, Marshal Brown gathered a group of like-minded men and set sights on robbing the Medicine Lodge Bank, believing it an easy target. However, their attempt turned into a deadly shootout upon entry, resulting in the deaths of the bank president and cashier. Brown and his gang fled empty-handed under gunfire. Captured shortly after by a posse, the fugitives were jailed and a lynch mob gathered. In a daring escape attempt, Brown nearly evaded capture but was fatally shot by a shotgun blast, ending his brief foray into crime. While awaiting his fate in jail, he penned a note to his wife, bluntly stating, "I didn't think this would happen." Such instances of lawmen crossing moral boundaries were exceptions rather than the rule among Western peace officers. Upon taking their oath, most lawmen dutifully fulfilled their responsibilities to the best of their abilities. Texas Ranger John Reynolds Hughes exemplified this dedication. Boasting a distinguished three-decade career dedicated to pursuing criminals and engaging in occasional shootouts, he fearlessly confronted trouble wherever it arose, from El Paso to Brownsville. In retirement, Hughes, known for his frugal lifestyle and astute savings, became the chairman and largest stockholder of an Austin bank. His legacy endures prominently in the Texas Ranger Hall of Fame in Waco. Canadian-born lawman Seth Bullock relocated to Montana Territory in 1867, where he swiftly engaged in territorial affairs, ultimately securing a seat in the Territorial Senate and playing a pivotal role in early developments at Yellowstone. By 1873, he had been elected sheriff of Lewis and Clark County. His journey to Deadwood, Dakota Territory in 1876, originally for business during the gold rush, led to his appointment as sheriff instead. Besides overseeing local mining and cattle interests, Bullock demonstrated effective stewardship as a forest supervisor of the Black Hills Reserve. In 1905, President Roosevelt appointed him U.S. Marshal for South Dakota, a position he held with distinction for 9 years, marking decades of service marked by integrity and dedication. Bob Paul's career in the American West also exemplified unwavering commitment and integrity, commencing with his arrival in California's goldfields in 1848. Initially elected as a town constable in 1854, Paul served intermittently as a lawman for nearly 4 decades. He held sheriff positions in both California and Arizona Territory, worked as a special messenger for Wells Fargo, and in 1890 received appointment as U.S. Marshal of Arizona Territory by President Benjamin Harrison. Paul passed away in 1901 while serving as a justice of the peace in Tucson. While the likes of Hughes, Bullock, and Paul achieved notable acclaim, few Western lawmen attained the iconic status of figures like Virgil Earp, Bill Tillman, or Charlie Siringo. Yet the majority of law enforcement officers, often forgotten by history, diligently fulfilled their duty, enduring long hours for meager pay while safeguarding their communities. Fortunately, the dramatic and scandalous tales of sheriffs involved in criminal activities or dereliction of duty were rare exceptions in the Old West. In the Wild West, lawmen and outlaws alike left their mark on history, shaping legends that continue to captivate us today. Their stories remind us of a time when justice was often as wild as the frontier itself. As we reflect on these tales of law and occasional disorder, let's remember the courage and complexity of those who walk the line between order and chaos. For more intriguing insights into the Old West and beyond, subscribe to our channel and journey with us through the untamed pages of history.